Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who is not opposed to tightening himself into a little ball to get to those hard-to-reach places.
Tim Longo.
When I think of you somersaulting or something, it's not a pretty picture, I gotta say.
I do think it's funny when you get a power up, or even when you got the morph ball back for the first time, they have her, jump into a little ball, and then they take the 3D model and make her into a ball size and spin it really fast. And it's like, if you really pay attention, it does not look like it should work.
Yeah, not remotely.
And you don't notice that in a 2D setting, of course, but it's funny when they're like, well, let's just smash her into a ball and it'll be fine.
Yeah.
But it is funny.
Yeah, she kind of brings her, her knees up like to her shoulders, basically, and tries to more or less puts her
It's
knees,
literally impossible. Yeah, I don't think
ridiculous.
It would actually work, but it's funny. And it works for for the game. But
my assumption is that that Samus years and years ago actually was liquefied, and it's just like her head in the suit. So like they can do whatever they want to her body. There's actually a magical item in D&D like that. So it's like a suit of armor or something. It's cursed. If you put it on, it slowly liquefies your body, so you can't take it off, and it supports you. So I think about that with Samus when I first read that magical item. I was like, oh yeah, that's how they do the morph ball, is that they can do whatever they want with her. She has no bones anymore.
However,
we're talking Metroid Prime, famous D&D horror game, Metroid Prime.
From a timeline lore perspective, this I don't have it up right now, but I think this takes place before Metroid, Super Metroid.
Right, correct.
Where she takes the suit off.
Oh, right.
Right? So
that's true.
She does have a body.
She still
up
has
until
a body.
that point.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I'm glad we've cleared that up. That
your theory doesn't hold water.
Right. I assume that because this is Nintendo, that's actually a different timeline.
Yeah, right. There's no
continuity between any of these games. Let's jump into it. I think we should start with the sort of 3D-ification, first-personification of Metroid, as you put it, which is fascinating. I've been playing Metroid Fusion in that we had a week off, and in that week, since I had already played to our stopping point, I wanted more Metroid, which is what happens whenever I play any Metroid. So I played a lot of Fusion, almost all of Fusion, and it is really interesting to think of how they managed to transform that into a 3D game. But I'll let you tackle that. It's your topic.
Yeah, it sounds like you have some topics related to it too, but I will kick it off. I think, with this section that we played, this being our second episode, right? I'm lost track of time. Yeah. We did skip we're back. Sorry about the skipping of the week. Been quite busy, but
and it's summer, so more of that to come. But
yeah, probably so. Yeah, we got a lot going on. But, I think with this section, because this is now we're getting into the meat of going from zone to zone and retracing steps within a zone, for lack of a better term, I don't know what to call them, but I'll call them zones. It's the first time that you're really starting to see how they structured a 3-dimensional, first-person game, but mainly just 3-dimensional space into the structure of a Metroidvania type game, Metroid specifically, of course. And it as a designer, as a level designer, as I play the game, like it's almost like it gives me hives to think about it.
Yeah,
because it must have been so difficult, so many iterations, so much discussion, and we know obviously that Nintendo is heavily involved and helping guide things. But I just like, and being a fan of the franchise and of Metroid and of 2D Metroid games, I just remember, and I'm reliving it all again, which I think I probably said the first episode, so I'm being redundant, but just this concept of living in a 3D Metroid space being so revelatory. And they did such, I think, a good job, with one exception I want to talk about because it is such a hard challenge. I think they rely on the map. They have to rely, for me at least, they have to rely on the map too much.
Yeah.
But that being said, that moment we've talked about before, I think, where you have been presented with a problem, we'll just call the lock and key moment or something. And you're like, okay, I don't know how to get through this. And then you kind of just keep playing, you keep meandering, you keep following their lead. You eventually get a thing, a tool, and then you're like, oh, wait a second. That thing I couldn't do before. It's that whole thing where it's like, okay, go back to thing. Now I can go into that door or whatever. It's such a bread and butter kind of thing for these games, but experiencing it in 3D is just like a whole nother level for as a fan and as a player and as a designer to just see how they structured it, how they chose to do it, how they choose to retread things when it doesn't work and when it does. But I think I said it before, but it is so nice to play the game again because it is such a good game, and they did such a good job overall of that translation. Yeah. Again, and partially it might just be my own way of thinking and spatial like memory and spatial reasoning problems. So it might be unique to me or certain people, but I do have a hard time like memorizing the flow of levels. And so I find myself opening the map a lot. I lose my sense of direction. Yeah. And some of it is art and it's kind of telegraphing and landmarking. So they could do some of that a little bit better. In the ruins, everything's very brown, right? And it's hard to know exactly where you are. So I think I do feel like I open the map too much, and which I would imagine a 3D translation of a Metroid game, I can see why that would be the case, right? Because you're constantly having to remember like how everything is structured. Yeah. When in 2D, it's like you just have those two planes to figure out, like, okay, and you can only go left, right, up and down, etc.
Right. Two dimensions, one plane technically.
Yeah.
The thing it gives me hives too, in the sense of thinking, like, I just think about like this all had to fit together, like, and to have a flow that feels even remotely natural to get from this area to the other area. I've actually turned off hints, because I find it a little frustrating to be told, okay, this happened, now go here,
interesting.
I've turned those off, and I will turn them on if I get to a point where I'm like, I don't know what I should be doing. Like I've lost, but I have been also keeping notes of the things that I've seen that I'm like, I don't think I can get to that now. I want to come back, and made little notes like, I think I'm going to need the spider, ball, or I think I'm going to need this. I think it's called the space jump, when you have you can jump, kind of spin jump or something. But anyway, the thing where you can jump forever. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm not going to be able to do this, for a long time, because I'm pretty sure that's one of the last things in the game. My recollection, anyway. I can definitely remember doing that. It's also a thing that's very difficult. The other thing too is that the sort of the visual language has to be a lot clearer in some ways in 3D, or at least it is clearer because you can look around like that. In the 2D games, they do a lot of tricks to sort of hide from you the sequence, right? In a way that they're not doing with the 3D game. Playing Fusion at the same time, there's a lot of places where it's like, well, you have to use the super bomb. You basically end up using the super bomb in every room to see if there's anything that it exposes, and there are places where there's a wall that is not really a wall. Like you can jump and hang from it and morph ball into a tiny tunnel that goes away, but you can't see the tunnel. It's
totally hidden. Yeah.
It's just hidden. It's just a tile. It looks like every other tile in the tile set. There's not a way to tell that it's different. Same thing with things that you can shoot through and fall through. And actually, one of the things I think I appreciate most about the translation other than just the Herculean task of like fitting it all together and making it all work. I can't imagine if you ever like changed a metric, what a nightmare it would be. Like if you changed like how big the rolling, the boost, the morph boost, sort of half pipes. Like if you changed like how far you had to go up those, can you imagine the level design headaches? Like everybody, there'd be a mutiny. People would be like, we already built all this stuff. You can't change that metric. Like it really points out that in 3D, I mean, in any game where you have, movement as a core mechanic, the traversal, you have to really think through your metrics and get those nailed down before you build anything. But they also there's a real clarity. Like I can walk into an area, look around and be like, okay, I can't do that yet. Can't do that yet. Oh, I think I can do that. And whatever, and that legibility really isn't there for me anyway in the, in Fusion. I mean, having played it before, there's a certain amount of like, just like visual language or just understanding of what things you should try, I guess, is really just like the game language more than anything else. But in the 3D version of the game, I feel like so much more is very visible to you, and that feels like a choice and not a necessity of the 3D. I mean, they could have made fake illusory walls that you could just like, you had to find that they weren't real. And maybe there will be some of those later for some like the last, 10 missile, expansions or whatever. But yeah, I just definitely really, really appreciated that aspect of it.
It's interesting. It is a great point. And obviously it'd be interesting to talk to somebody about how cognizant they were of it. But, but to your point, when you go into full 3D like this, where you're able to, it's not like a space flight sim or something where you have that sort of 360 degree problem, but you can kind of hypothetically go in any direction, look in any direction. There's a different cognitive load that if there were, like, you can get away in the 2D games. I feel like I remember often you use the map and the negative space on the map to get some clues about where things completely hidden things might be. You're like, why is this hole? Why is this negative space around the map? I'll put a bomb there or whatever, or etc. So, and those are great, like delightful moments. Here, it's to your point. It's more like, is that wall cracked?
Right.
I can't tell because there's some other cracked walls over here. But then the other thing, which I really, really wonder when this came in, when the scanning feature actually came in, whether it was originally part of the pitch and the design or whether it came in later as a necessity. But for me, one of the first things I do in every room is I just go into scan mode and I look around.
Oh, I'm in scan mode constantly.
And so it's almost like they're going to probably, in most cases, unless it's like a missile upgrade or something that is definitely secondary or tertiary, they're going to tell me what my options are, Yeah. And so that's like a whole nother level of helping the player, unravel a 3-dimensional Metroid game.
Yeah.
It's just astounding to me. As a quick aside of a story, and I won't name names, but I'm starting to work on Speaker for this series. And I have a colleague who worked on the second and third ones, but not this one. But they're going to hopefully put me in contact with somebody who worked on the first one. However, they told, again, I won't call anyone out, but and they have some ideas on somebody we could get. But there was one person they talked about who worked on Prime who said, there's no way in hell they will ever talk about working on this game.
Oh, wow.
Because I got the impression that it was such a traumatic experience. For whatever reason, that, complexity, maybe it's working with Nintendo's perfectionism, whatever it is, these are all my
also making it work on the GameCube, which is, tiny disc relative to that sounded wrong. That was not a euphemism for Florida governor. A lot of people are calling him Tiny D, which is pretty funny. Anyway, you've got a media rather that is not as fully functional as the others of the era, right? When it came out, it was like a joke. Are you kidding me? Like, this is you've gone from cartridges to this, like this
Yeah.
tiny, like your own form factor. Of course you did, because you're Nintendo. Like
That's so cute.
Yeah, they're cute. All right.
That has a handle. The system has a handle. You can carry it around.
I love the GameCube, but the disc is just like, why would you do that? Like, why not?
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So there's that, right? And performance, of course, was also, I'm sure, a concern for, and it has to feel really, really fluid, and it has to run solidly. Otherwise, it's not going to feel good to move around in a movement game. So I can imagine there were a lot of, because that solving those problems is a whole team exercise. It's no one person can solve that problem. You cannot just squeeze performance out of something forever. Believe me, I've tried. And so I'm sure there were times where it's like you have to find another place to put this XYZ, like this curved surface, right? This, the half pipe, you have to move that, because we can't have that and be able to see this other thing at the same time, whatever it was, right? And suddenly you're like, oh man. And again, it's like metrics probably were really, really important for performance as well. Like, so I could see all of that just being a nightmare to manage, especially for a team that had not done something quite like, it's a new studio, right? This was, right, as we mentioned last time, this was their one engine that they were writing code for a game for that survived out of 4 that they were working on. And this is the one that Nintendo got behind and said, yeah, we can maybe do something with this. So it was a lot. It was just doing an awful lot.
Yeah. And again, I don't know the reasons that he made the statement, but
yeah.
But like you said, you can see a convergence of a lot of different things. In a way, like if somebody were to, come to me and say, make a 3D Metroid game before it existed, first person shooter 3D Metroid game, it's like, that's what?
Yeah. How many years do I get?
Yeah. What are you talking about? Why would you, but it's one of those, again, that's why we're playing for the podcast. It's one of those games where you're like, wow, I'm sure glad this happened, even though I would never have seen it coming in a way. So it's fascinating. But also, we talked about in the first episode, there was also the sort of stars aligning from the landscape and where the industry was, right? Where the trends were is the word I was searching for, and first person games and each system wanted to have theirs, we played and talked about Halo and et cetera, et cetera. So you can see how the logic gets there, but yeah, it's just seems like an insurmountable challenge that they really pulled off. I also want to do a quick shout out to the remaster team, because that's what we're playing. And I don't think there's a way to Halo Combat Evolved special edition, right? You can't turn that off. It's like you can't.
No, I think you're yeah, you've got what you've got. Yeah.
Got what you got. So I would like to compare them, but there's art direction that comes from the original anyway, despite maybe up-res textures or something. But I just think the game really still holds up. And I know, again, some of that is the remaster specifically, but I still think from a visual language perspective or visual design or whatever it is, audio design, that stuff is probably very similar to the originals, maybe higher fidelity. But the translation from all of those perspectives, the game still really does hold up, and is impressive. I'm playing on handheld mode, so it's quite small.
Right.
But
I've played kind of half and half. Having just played Metroid Prime 2 a couple of years ago, I will say that the art direction of the series is so strong and so appropriate to what the system could do, that it actually really, really looks good. It looks remarkably good.
You mentioned that before.
480p or whatever that, the progressive scan mode. I played it because I played it. I think I actually played it on the Wii when I finished it or replayed it. I think that it just, they really, really managed their sort of pixel density and things like that. Things that we talked about, I think God of War was one of the games that we've talked about that in particular about, where that's really, really true. Talking a little bit about the level design stuff for a moment, the thought I had while you were talking about that and the sort of, giving you hives. I thought a little bit about, to speak of another game we've played, Eco, and the way that world connects so consistently. I mean, and it's a very different approach because everything's sort of big and grand, in a way that this has to be like literally human sized, right? It has to be something that she can reasonably traverse, even with her sort of special powers and things like that. Because a lot of it she has to traverse before she has, special abilities as well, right? So it has to make sense. And it has to make sense, I guess, for the Chozo, the beings who came before, right? So, assuming they weren't, 200-foot tall giants or something like that, they also presumably were somewhere near Samus's size. So it all has to kind of like make sense from that standpoint. So, and Eco is not that. Eco is like everything's like almost comically large. Like the blocks are huge, and and the walls are, it's a little bit about just sort of that style of architecture. But yeah, I do find that really an interesting comparison, because it's from around the same time, right? Eco is maybe 2001. So it's, they similarly connect a lot of stuff. When we replayed it, I was like, I had no idea this connected to that. There were places where, after we had finished, I went and did a speed run with a walkthrough and was like, oh wow, you can get from there to there. Like you can just leave her in this room forever and then go get her because it connects in this one place. It's like, how is that? That's amazing.
Oh wow.
There's stuff like that. Cause I think that game had a like finish it in under 3 hour type, trophy or achievement or whatever. And I was like, oh, I'll see what that's about and just use the walkthrough. And was like, oh wow, you really have to A, know where she's safe, but B, have found all the ways things connect. Because it would be very, very difficult to do it without that. And this game feels sort of magically similar, right? There's nothing with the exception of the elevators, which are traditional Metroid elements. They're in Fusion as well. With that exception, that's for streaming, but it's also like it's also a solution to the connectivity problem of just like how is this all going to fit together?
You're in a completely different place. Yeah. Well, I mean, the other game that came to my mind, and what probably I'm going to say, get your shot glass ready. Yeah, at least from a macro world design perspective, not from a micro necessarily, is Dark Souls. Mm-hmm. It came to my mind as I was transitioning from kind of like macro space to macro space, and then those shortcuts, of course. And the only reason I bring it up is that I'm sure we talked about it during the Dark Souls series that, it's a legacy connecting to a legacy, right? It's like the Metroidvania structure, similar to like what we've talked about from time to time about how RPGs as RPG elements have leaked into pretty much every genre at this point. The Metroidvania structure of, lock and key and kind of connectivity in unexpected ways and retreading something in unexpected ways. The Dark Souls series is obviously one of the new master classes of that from a macro world perspective. I mean, some amazing moments of connectivity there where you're like, I can't believe this door goes here,
Right.
And especially in late game Dark Souls, when you have retreaded so much, the world quite well, and you're like, okay, I need to get from here to here. What way am I going to go? Even though I don't necessarily need a lock and key, it's still learning the world and and being good at navigating the world.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing, so I've I mentioned I've been playing Fusion. The other game I've been playing. Excuse me, sorry, phone. The other thing I've been playing lately, to give a more of a sort of traditional shooter descendant, is I've been playing the second modern Wolfenstein game, Wolfenstein 2, the new Colossus from Machine Games. And the thing that I thought about when I was playing that in comparison with Metroid is how basically one-dimensional their weapons are. Now they do, right? Their weapons are fantastic and cool. They feel great. Like, that's not my complaint. And I have no complaint, really. It's a great game of its type, and from the lineage of the Doom, Quake, id lineage, really. I mean, directly, because it's an id Tech game. The thing that I would say is that the one thing that really, really sets Metroid Prime apart, the Metroid Prime series apart, is that and I can't think of other games that have done this, is that the guns are one-dimensional. The guns are there in the id Tech, Descended, and others shooters. Those are there to kill things. They don't open up anything else about the world, right? And Wolfenstein has added, there's a certain amount of traversal in some of them. Like in the first game, they have a gadget that you can use to like cut through walls, and it's kind of a cool element, but it's not. It's like it's a key that's not a key. But so much about what makes Metroid and sets this as apart as a shooter is that all these things that you get are opening different doors. They are allowing you to do things to enemies that you couldn't do before. You can freeze and shatter an enemy, or you might be able to stop something moving long enough that you can deal with it, or use it in some way, right, that you couldn't otherwise. So it's just like that distinction of like the sort of single focus, highly polished. Because I will say, as a pure shooter, comparing them, like the Wolfensteins of the world, have amazing fluidity and play really, really great. As pure shooters, but they are limited in that, like, what the guns do is like space and effects, like what kind of cover space they, you're basically dealing with, like, okay, and maybe some like effects, like, okay, use this one against that enemy types of things. And, but a lot of it in the end, right, it boils down to like, I like this gun, so I use this gun all the time, and not, I use this gun because it's, because it's really good against this thing. And then I have to switch really quickly to this other gun. I'm more likely to switch guns because I run out of ammo, but also that almost never happens, right? It's really just like a very, like, play this in these challenges however you want. Here's a bunch of things that do damage in different ways, but then they don't do anything else, right? They don't open doors. They don't, they don't expose something about the world that I didn't know. They don't cause me to look at the world in a different way. I don't get a new weapon and think, oh, I'm so glad I have this. Now I can do combat in this fundamentally different way. I mean, that might be a lack of my own creativity when it comes to guns. It doesn't feel like it. Occasionally I'll get a scope on a thing and I'll be like, oh, okay, that makes that gun easier to use, but that doesn't really change how I go into encounters, So yeah, I mean, it's one thing I really appreciate about Metroid or Metroid Prime specifically, is that the shooter part of it is not one-dimensional. Like when I pick up a new weapon, I'm more excited about the things it's going to do for me in the world than how it's going to make combat feel.
Yeah, right.
So
yeah, I mean, to your point, the combat, like the basic combat of it, especially because, as we know, like there was one of their solutions to the translation into 3D was heavily leaning into the lock-on,
right?
Which isn't very traditional for FPSs, because part of the FPS, language is aiming and being good at aiming or not.
Yeah.
And so they kind of like flattened that somewhat, right? So it's more about like location targeting and switching targets, and like you said, lock and key and more tools oriented stuff, which does fit Metroid. So yeah, that's a good point, that we have to kind of technically call it a first person shooter, but in a way it's not as well. The only other category that another shot glass drink I will bring up is Prey, or really just immersive sims that are shooters, like they at least try to dabble. You were just mentioning like what other first person games kind of, do any of the others do stuff like this? And obviously things like the goo gun in Prey,
that's fair.
Things like that, which are more creative. But you're right. Even in those cases, like
most of the
guns are about
Half-Life 2 has the gravity gun, right? And that that opens up a ton of stuff, and that's another example. but you're also not getting a ton of those. Like there's the one, right? A lot of games have the one thing. Even Dead Space, Dead Space has the one thing. You have the cutting gun, right? And it's kind of like it changes how that combat feels from like, I don't know what you use. You use some like plasma gun or something like that.
Right?
Yeah. And it turns it into a more straight shooter, and but going with the sort of unique weapon there makes that kind of moment to moment a little more like terrifying, and switching the beams left and right. It's kind of it's in the same lineage as those other, more traditional shooters, but does add an interesting wrinkle. So I'm not trying to say there's not, other things that they're kind of playing.
Oh no, I know what you're saying.
But like this is its own thing for sure. So, and I really appreciate it for that. And it was something I'd forgotten because I had not. I mean, I played the sequel more recently, but I wasn't kind of in a contemplative mood. I was just like, I'd like to play this, and I wasn't analyzing it like we do for here. So, and not playing another shooter at the same time. So,
yeah, it's really cool that you're playing both at the same time because you have it is such a good comparison point. And another good one in its class, a good one at that. Yeah. It sounds like
it's great. It's great fun.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it with probably every Nintendo game we've played too, but I think the other thing that is another way of saying what you're saying that I'll call out is that that even though we know that there was an element of, each platform wanted its shooter or what have you, and there was maybe some trend / landscape / genre pressure on Nintendo or Miyamoto or whomever to kind of think about that problem. The one thing that is nice to know is a constant is the fact that when they chose to go after that problem solving from a almost a SKU plan perspective, or like what's their portfolio perspective, of having what's their shooter, right? They have platformers figured out. They have, action adventure with Zelda, whatever. They didn't, to your point, they didn't try to just make, well, and you could also say that they have other things like the Golden Eyes of the world and things that are maybe a little more traditional, but those aren't, internal. But rather than them going after trying to beat Doom, at the time, or beat Halo, or do like something very direct, they made a shooter that fit, the franchise, or fit Nintendo, or fit what they were trying to do. And I think that we've seen time and time again that, even though there's a popularity in a certain area, and I think there's a lot of similarities to Breath of the Wild to other things, but I would put Breath of the Wild in that space of, okay, open world games, right? Witcher, whatever it is, like there's, the Assassin's Creed games, etc. Like there's a milieu there that like is kind of known from a general perspective of what those kinds of games are, and everyone does their own spin. But even with Breath of the Wild, they're like, okay, we're going to make one of these now, but we're going to do one that makes sense for us and for Zelda, and not be kind of feeling, it doesn't feel like they're pressured in like making sure they have this feature and do it this way, blah, blah, blah. Right. It's like, it's nice to see that they stick to their guns in that, even though this is retro. And so it's kind of internal, external, that they've found a way to still achieve that, that sort of uniqueness. And it's still, it does feel, even the level design flow feels Nintendo-y, in the way that they dole things out and the way that you discover things. And it's not perfect. It's not like, say, as perfect as Super Metroid or something like that, or Ocarina of Time, but it's still very, very good.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually was just looking to see if there had been any other Nintendo first party or second party like shooters on the GameCube, and there really weren't. There were some ports. There were some ports. Time Splitters was on there. There was Turok. I don't really know the story with Turok, but that's not them, right? That's Namco Bandai or Bandai. Namco,
yeah. I don't think that would.
And Geist is the only other thing I saw there, but that's not really that. It's not really a shooter. It's a first-person game, but you're a ghost possessing things. And they had a couple like Medal of Honor, Call of Duty type things as well. that were ports, to the and some Bond stuff that was not rare, because I think at that point it had gone maybe to EA.
I think it was EA. Yeah.
Yeah. So just nobody else doing. They did the only ones that were that like I didn't remember any of those games were on there. I didn't remember Time Splitters was ported to the GameCube. Of course, Turok. I probably could have figured there was one or two, but wouldn't have been something I would have thought of. This is the game that stands out, and it's I looked. Its Metacritic from 2002 is a 97.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, it sort of stands apart from these other ones, doesn't it? Quite a bit. Time Splitters, I think, was next with like in the high 80s. So it really does stand apart significantly, and it's hard to replicate. It's because I think when you talk about somebody maybe not ever wanting to talk about this project, I can imagine it was really, really hard to make it the definitive game.
Yeah.
In this kind of mold.
It allows them to own the space too, right? If they don't go after Doom or Halo or something like that, then on their system, even strategically, and I mean, maybe we're giving them too much credit about thinking this through, but I don't think so. It is very much them, that Nintendo staying true to themselves. But if it's such a unique first-person experience that you can't get it on another system, then that's why people buy systems, right?
Right, that's true.
Okay, I can't get Metroid. I will never get Metroid Prime on another system. If I want to play something that doesn't feel like Halo, doesn't feel like, I'm trying to think of on PlayStation, what shooter? Time Splitters was on PlayStation, but
yeah, but it wasn't.
There's Black was one that was
that was
fairly popular. Maybe some Medal of Honor stuff was there, but well, definitely, I know some of that was there. But anyway, point being is like like I have to, is it a system seller? Yes, to some degree, not like the others maybe, but if you were really looking for a unique first-person shooter-y kind of thing, it is a system seller in that regard. I know for me, because as I've already established, not being a big Mario fan, though I did play, it was the water one. What's it? Mario on GameCube.
Oh, Sunshine. Yeah.
Sunshine. I did play some of it. And I played Wind Waker. But for me,
would have been the PlayStation franchise. I was trying to think of was there
which one?
Killzone.
Oh yeah, Killzone. Yeah, okay, good catch. Yeah, but anyway, for me, Metroid Prime was a system seller for me, where I wanted one of the things I wanted to play on the system the most was Metroid Prime.
Yeah, I don't think I might have played this and Fusion that year. Because I had not owned a Nintendo system prior to this, and because I was not a console gamer growing up, and so this was, this probably was my first exposure, and I probably got it because you and Andrew, who I think whose copy I borrowed, were like, you have to play this game, and I was like, okay, happy to, and I did get a GameCube a little late too. Well, not super late. I didn't get it at launch, but I don't know. I might have gotten it for Christmas as a gift or something like that. So I was looking for things to play, and probably you and others were like, okay, well, here's the game you got to play. I played a bunch of stuff on that system. I really enjoyed that system. I played. I have a large library of games for that actually. A couple of
Luigi's Mansion.
Yeah, I played Luigi's Mansion. I played a couple Mario games. They had that 1,000-Year Door, Mario RPG game. I played that. I played Sunshine. Played 2 Metroid Primes. I played a lot on the system. I have some that I think I played Beyond Good and Evil on the system. I think that's what I had a copy for. We played Crystal Chronicles a bit on the system, the Final Fantasy game that required GBAs. I think you had to play
Four Sword too.
Yeah, and Four Sword. Yep, I still. Well, maybe I don't have that anymore. Maybe I left it with Andrew, because he was the person who was if I was visiting, because I lived here by that time. So I would have been traveling. So I think I might have just been like, here, you hold on to this. I don't know. I'd have to go look and see if that's true. But that was some comedy co-op.
I don't know about that game, but
yeah, or Crystal Chronicle for that reason.
Yeah, exactly.
So
I don't want to carry
one of you has to carry the save space around.
Pot for the rest of my gaming days.
Cool.
But, yeah.
Let's. Do you want to talk about the music a little bit?
Yeah. Let me. And one point I forgot before I hit that is on the 3D translation. The other thing that just is delightful and not exactly level design related in that translation, but connected to it is enemy design, and there's sort of a delightful element if you're a fan or remember or know any of the enemies to have them translated to 3D and how their gameplay is both the same but also different. Based on the mechanics and systems of this game, so it's like seeing a screech bat or whatever those are called, or like just some of these bread and butter enemies that you've met before in other Metroid games, but you're like, oh, that's one of those. You're like you vaguely remember or something like. And they have some new stuff, I think, too. But there's just like, or even that cutscene that plays where you see Ridley. Flying over the thing, and you're like, "Oh no!" It's just like bringing those kind of things back, and it's very much that. I think they did a great job, kind of on an homage kind of way of like, okay, these are the enemies that crawl along on the walls and they go upside down, and you're like, oh yeah, I remember that on platforms in the 2D version where they're crawling around, and you gotta do this, that, or the other thing.
You got to get up there, and you've got to get around them somehow, or you need to use them. Like you need to freeze them and use them as a bridge to another place because you can't get there otherwise. Yeah, that's exactly the sorts of things I'm talking about when it comes to getting a new weapon where you're like, oh, now I can do this. Like, it makes you totally recontextualize the space, but it might be because you kind of know what the enemies are like, they're, it's very simple enemy behavior for the most part, right? I mean, they, a lot of this sort of non-threatening things or things that only threaten like when you approach are just on a path. And then their thing is like they hunker down when you get near and they shoot out a, whatever, something damaging, like a little explosion or whatever that's going to damage you. So you kind of like, they're very legible enemies in those cases. They don't require a lot of movement, right? This is sort of a first toe dipping, and and the controller's not really built for it either, because it's got that weird second stick. So you've just got this sort of feel of that they were leaning on their archetypes, their enemy archetypes that make it feel Metroid-y, and using the fact that you kind of know about them or can easily glean about them to make it a comfortable space to even have that combat with them in. Like, oh, okay, these are innocuous things. I don't want to get near it, but so I can shoot it from afar. Oh, it's easy to lock onto it, et cetera. It's just very comforting because it's not moving in some crazy pattern. It's not jumping around, at least until you get to the space pirates. So,
yeah. Well, and it takes they took similar, if in some cases the same, but very similar principles to what the 2D games have, and they applied it to 3D. And then that's also just a very difficult thing to do. And so it just, kudos to them, and also like how the lock-on works, or how sightlines work, or how the different weapon types, work when it comes to tuning and balancing those from range, whether it be range, right? Because like the concept of what your range is totally different now, right? You can't have certain assumptions because you don't see your shots in the same way you do in a 2D game where they're very clearly going across the screen or whatever, So it's just kind of it's really fascinating to see that again, another form of the 3D translation that they probably iterated the heck on to kind of find the right balance of all that stuff. But really fascinating. Yeah. And then the camera, right? Like being able to, with Morph Ball, like these sort of pseudo 2D moments where you go to a Morph Ball on the side of a wall and you can kind of roll out of that wall if you want to. It's still there, but they change the camera. Yeah. And it's like all of a sudden you're in this like 3D Marble Madness situation, where the camera is actually, dynamic / spline / whatever,
Yeah.
and that's
But
something
very
that's
Prince
just,
of Persia,
yeah, very magical for a Metroid game to kind of see that translation back and forth. Or even I just love going into a tunnel as the morph ball. And I'm just going forward.
Right.
And the
and
camera
the
is following.
design of the morph ball is that, like, as you start moving, it's sort of wobbly, and then it's like you finally kind of lock onto the the right axis, so you just kind of have the cool beam splitting the two halves of the morph ball that's kind of spinning in front of you. It just looks neat. Like, it sort of wobbles for a while, and then you kind of, like, as you get comfortable moving in the direction you're moving, it's like she does at the same time.
Yeah.
Often, I mean, it doesn't always happen that way, but generally speaking, it's like the line will follow the direction of movement, and so it's a little wobbly at first, and then you kind of lock into the tunnel or whatever. And I also really like the transition from the morph ball back into the helmet. It's not instantaneous. You feel the momentum of the ball, which kind of, like, as she stands up, it kind of like throws her out in front and leaves the camera behind, and the camera, like, kind of moves, tracks that, like, momentum into the helmet, and into her, basically, so that you're back in the that I'm sure that took a lot of tweaking, just to make it feel right. I'm sure that was because I'm sure there were people who got sick, with the first attempt. That's a very common problem.
Yeah, good point.
Obi-Wan at the time, right, was trying to do. This was Obi-Wan when it was in development at LucasArts, was originally a first-person game, not I think it shipped as a third-person game, and they tried to do a lot of the same sorts of things, where it's like, well, you're Jedi, so you can, like, you're pretty acrobatic, right? And some of the things that they tried were like, okay, you can do, like, a dive roll, like you would do in martial arts or something, and that was not good if the camera stayed, right? And if it stayed first person, it was not. Yeah, I don't know why it's fine to dive roll in my actual body and not when I do it in a video game, but it was not comfortable in a video game. Yeah. Anyway, I think it's because the control feels I was going to say it's proprioception. Proprioception, I think that's the word. It's knowing where to put your head. It's where to look to sort of track the motion of the movement, and you can't do that with a mouse and keyboard easily. Anyway, back to the music.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted. I don't have too much, like, too many nuanced points to say, because I'm not a musician. But
is it kind of one note then?
Okay, there we go. We got there. You got there, folks. It's another sort of translation point to some degree, because they, even in Super Metroid, we probably talked about it there, but they, like Mario and Zelda, they have established the aesthetics behind the music for the franchise coming into this game, and so getting it into a more orchestral, high fidelity, and again, the remaster might have even higher fidelity, but I'm sure it's in the ballpark. And I remember this from playing it in the past, that translation, similar to translating in the world, like, oh, I'm standing in this world now. I never thought I'd be able to do this. Hearing the musical, the melodies, even some of the short vignettes for certain, like, getting a power up or whatever, they're so nostalgic, but at the same time so high quality and just layered and rich. And it's like, because we talked about things like other especially sci-fi shooters in the space, where you talk about Halo, obviously known for its music in a whole different way, but Metroid has, as a franchise, has a very specific musical style, right, that is very sci-fi. It's very, like, it's very like, how do I want to say, not nostalgic, but stylized, I guess, and also, like, retro, I want to say. It feels like Lost Planet or something. It feels like
Yeah.
it feels like not taking it's not like it's taking itself too like.
Yeah, it feels like it's, for me, if I can kind of try to come up with something, it feels like a science fiction version of a native instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Like native winds, like that are not any winds you and I have ever heard, because we've never been to, I don't know, Zebes or Zebes or however that's pronounced, right? Or Talon 4 or whatever. So it's a, because it's like a synthesized flute sound, but it's deeper than that. It's like more like a bassoon. Like there's this woodwind quality, but it's a science fiction woodwind, right? It's which makes sense, I guess, for the bird people, right? The Chozo are kind of birdy.
Yeah. And it changes per section, right? When you go into the lava section, right? It's like you hear drums and it gets real like, bassy and stuff. Pulp was the word I was searching for. Like pulpy. The reason I thought of Lost Planet, and I'm talking about like the original series and stuff, but it's got that kind of Star Trek-y, pulpy kind of like, not Star Wars, right? It's not like that high, big, even though this is more orchestral than the 2D games, but it's got, and they have like even sound effects in there, beeps and boops, and like, it just fits so well. And and it always has, I think it's always stood out from other sci-fi franchises, especially in games for me, where I feel like even though I love Halo's score, Halo is taking a page from other cinematic orchestral pieces, right? It's in that vein, whether you say Star Wars or whatever. But this is like, there isn't a lot like Metroid's music, and translating it to this kind of like high end version of it, even something like picking up a power up feels so good and sounds so good when you do it, and it just like it's a little bit like, for me, it's a little bit like Metal Gear music or something, where some of those, or Star Wars even, right? Where some of those tunes.
I ran out of drink like half an hour ago.
Yeah, fair enough. But it's like it's like when you hear a nostalgic piece of music done in a new way, or even a new like higher quality way, it's something that's inside you. Or Zelda, right? Zelda's a good example, right? You hear those traditional Zelda tunes, and you're like, oh man, I'm a kid again, or whatever. So.
Yeah. Yeah, Nintendo music has held up remarkably well. I think it was something we talked a little bit with Grant Kirkhope a little bit about. It's like you needed a really strong hook. It needed to be a good, solid, and fairly simple melody. Of course, they go all the way back to like Game Boys and NESs, right, to be able to do this. So you really need something that kind of is very strong in a very minimal way. But those things actually translate, if they're well done, to a much richer palette. I mean, you think of something like, well, I know you probably haven't played, but like Super Mario Odyssey, has so many different orchestrations of Mario music. It's fantastic. The music is amazing in that, and it's all just Mario stuff, right? I mean, it's not new tunes, it's all Koji Kondo, music, and so it is remarkable how well those hold up to. I mean, I think we even saw that a little bit with Mega Man 2 versus X, right? And the higher quality music of X, having a different kind of feel, but still having a strength and being, decidedly Mega Man, and a different, a very different sort of musical style from these games. But yeah, it's. I think those things are really impressive. Composing what are essentially chip tunes or whatever is, it is a good fertile ground where it's like, if it works, like it's really good. If it works at all, it's really good, and then that can carry forward. So anyway.
And I haven't done the research on it, but there probably are Metroid Prime specific themes going on too that I haven't distinguished, as well. So there's both nostalgia and
new stuff.
And new stuff.
I'm sure there is, although I don't. It's funny because I played Metroid Fusion, but I largely played it turned down because I would like play it and watch a baseball game or something like that, because it's like, well, I can kind of have this on and be listening to the game, and then turn down the Metroid music, so I wasn't hearing it too much. Yeah, whatever. Let's try to get in at least the review and one of the emails. Maybe I'll do one of my emails, and you can do. I sent you a review as well as an email.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So why don't you go ahead and take that? Emails were sent to devgameclub@gmail.com. We got this review through Apple Podcast infrastructure. I should start taking a look at like Spotify or something, but let's be honest, it hasn't happened yet, so it's probably not going to happen. So if you send us reviews that don't go and you don't hear them, just let us know and we can track them down. We do love reading them on the air. They're great fun. But go, sir.
Okay, this review is from Dave K _says. I think the underscore is important, so I said it.
Yeah.
Title, brilliant podcast, but beware, all in caps. Okay. Oh, I can't wait to read this. A wonderful listen for anyone with any interest in the games of the past and how they may have shaped the games of today. The hosts, Tim and Brett, are in the industry. It can give an insight into the methods developers may use to achieve their goals in creating the games we enjoy. However, beware that listening to any given series will more than likely convince you to play the game discussed. I am currently 65 hours into Morrowind playthrough. I simply don't have the time for listening. I don't have the time. Since listening to the Morrowind episodes, and I spent time last night working out how to get my hands on the Warcraft game since starting to listen to that. I have hundreds more episodes to catch up on, so I'm looking forward to the hours of entertainment to come. That was good. Yeah. Good punchline.
Thank you. Dave K says, yeah, you've got both the podcast, but also replaying the games or playing them for the first time.
You're in for it.
Yeah.
And I don't even finish the games most of the time.
Yeah. I think you're up to like 11 or 12 now that they keep a list on the Discord.
Oh, jeez.
So might even be a bot command to ask what's finished and unfinished. But yeah, anyway. All right, I'll do one email and then I think we'll call it a night because I've got another thing to do here.
Oh yeah, you gotta go.
The subject is GoldenEye 007 from Spock _thoughts. So Dave K _says and Spock.
The same middle name.
Spock K, yeah, thoughts. You meant the underscore. Hello, Brett and Tim. I was wondering when you'd finally play GoldenEye for the podcast. Well, we had to wait till Nintendo. So that we could pay for the privilege. I'm a long-time listener, first-time emailer to the show, and although I've only played a handful of the games you've discussed, I always enjoy hearing your insights and vicariously, quote-unquote, playing along with you. But GoldenEye is a game I definitely put a lot of hours into during my late teens, early 20s, probably too many hours. I had enjoyed the movie and so decided to buy the game knowing little about it. I wasn't expecting an FPS, but once I started playing, I was hooked. And the multiplayer mode was, for me and my best friend, the greatest thing about it. Looking for the most competitive, realistic experience possible in two-person multiplayer, we always played with the radar turned off, the auto-aim turned off, and in License to Kill mode. One shot is all it takes. But as we got more and more familiar with the multiplayer maps, we began to see a major failing of the split-screen format. It was easy to recognize your opponent's location just by looking at his half of the screen, making it easy to find him. You could also see when your enemy was on their way to your location. It was impossible to be stealthy or surprise each other. Dissatisfied, and I'm reading this because I know that this is not the only time that this happened. This may be nostalgic for many people. Dissatisfied, we came up with a low-tech but effective solution. We cut apart a large cardboard box to fashion a long strip about 6 feet long and as wide as my 4x3 CRT TV screen. Then we lined up one end of the cardboard strip with the horizontal center of the screen and taped it in place with masking tape and unfurled the strip of cardboard out in front of the TV. My friend would crawl under the cardboard and lay on the floor, his head resting against the bottom of the couch. I'd sit on the couch, centered with the cardboard strip. Neither of us could see each other's half of the screen. And what a difference it made in the feel of the game. Suddenly, it was so much more intense. You could never tell when you might turn a corner into a hail of bullets from an RCP-90 or where your friend might be perched waiting to pick you off with a sniper rifle. We left that cardboard taped to my TV for months. I watched only the top half of TV shows during that time, unwilling or too lazy to keep taking the cardboard down and setting it back up. Although I no longer play FPSs these days, when GoldenEye comes up, I'll always remember my friend laying on the floor with that strip of cardboard draped over him while we tried to hunt each other down. Hopefully the two of you can battle against each other when you try the multiplayer mode, and it would totally make for a great live stream that I'm sure all your listeners would watch. That's something you wanted to set up. For maximum effect, I suggest you set it to license to kill and turn off the radar. And I have no idea whether the Switch allows you to play multiplayer online against friends using it full screen. But if not, all you really need is some cardboard. Thanks for all the work you put into the podcast. Looking forward to the next episode. Live long and prosper, Spock Thoughts, if that is your real name. Yeah, I thought that was great. We did, of course, get to the multiplayer. We did not take the time to do some cardboard because the screen's very small. I was traveling. Would have been... very uncomfortable, I think, honestly, to try to find a way to... I guess I could have just taped over parts of it.
It would have been hilarious. Oh, yeah. We could have just covered it up. Yeah,
you could have literally covered it pretty easily if you play in handheld mode.
We did the cardboard thing at LucasArts at the time.
Yeah, I thought so.
Yeah,
right?
we did make... Somebody might have brought it in from home or something, but I do have a memory of doing it on one of the couches where we taped the cardboard up to try to... And it was actually 4-player split screen, so the cardboard was like... an X on the screen, and not as effective as it sounds like it was for Spock, but it was similar. Yeah, but I know lots of people have that story for sure.
Yeah, I know that's a common one. I mean, you definitely remember. What do they call it? What did people call it? What did they call screen cheating?
Screen. Yeah, it's blanking on it.
Screen watching, maybe, or something like. But there was like a definite term for like. Derogatory.
Yeah, don't XYZ me.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't remember what people said. I didn't, because I didn't play a lot of games like this where that mattered. Like if you were playing Mario Kart 64, then you could watch what different, like where they are doesn't help you. You got to focus on where you are. So it was not, didn't really matter. If they're ahead of you, you'll be where they are soon. And if they're behind you, they'll be where you are soon. So it didn't make any sense, but, so I didn't have any examples like that for me, but I loved it. I loved reading that one when it came in. Sorry, we are well behind on email. We still have all your emails and we will get to them. We may have to do at some point a catch up because they're starting to pile up, and doing 2 Nintendos in a row, it always brings it out. Anyway, thanks for those. You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com or on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host at
Tim Longo Jr. with the JR at the end.
Someday maybe he will Twitch again at a similar URL. It might be a while. The way things are going. I'm making no promises whatsoever at this point. We also have a Discord. There's a link in the show notes to join. You can get little teasers about what we're tackling next. I often drop the game or the next game or the next section on there. It's a great community. We're about 100 strong, and it's really fun to chat with folks. And people have their own streams that they advertise in there, sometimes playing the games we are. It's a great place to hang out. And I'm in there several days a week, just kind of checking in and chatting with folks. So.
And we did stream GoldenEye multiplayer.
We did, in fact, stream multiplayer Discord through the Discord because Calamity Nolan, with whom we played, was able to... I was traveling, so I couldn't stream. Tim had no means of streaming his Switch, but Calamity had us covered, so that worked out well, and some people got to watch and chat while we were playing. It was good fun. And it has lost the time, sadly, so got to join the Discord for that. Our intro and outro music was written and performed by Kirk Hamilton, commissioned by friend of the cast, Aaron Evers, and our logo, that Discord that I mentioned, and our merch store of our Mark Garcia. Have fun expanding your missile collection this week, and good night.
Good night.